The mansion was hushed at night, the air thick with the hum of silence. Crystal sconces glowed dimly along the corridors, throwing long shadows across the marble floors. Sarah wandered restlessly, unable to sleep. Her mother was comfortable, the nurses attentive, but Sarah's mind refused to quiet. The memory of David's hand brushing hers at breakfast replayed again and again, burning hotter with each thought. She drifted into the library, a vast room of leather and oak, books rising in dark towers to the ceiling. The scent of old paper and polish filled the air. She sank into a chair by the tall window, her wrapper drawn tight around her, and pressed her hand to her belly. "You'll be safe," she whispered to her unborn children. "No matter what he says, no matter what he does. I'll protect you." The words had barely left her lips when a voice, low and sharp, cut through the room. "You talk as though I'm the danger." Her whole body jolted. She turned. David stood half in shadow, leaning against the doorway, his shirt unbuttoned at the throat, his tie gone. The dim light caught the hard lines of his face, the restless storm in his eyes. Sarah's pulse thudded painfully. "You shouldn't sneak up on people." "I wasn't sneaking." His gaze raked over her, not cruelly, but with an intensity that stripped her bare. "You couldn't sleep." She bristled. "Neither could you." For a moment, silence hung, broken only by the faint ticking of the mantel clock. Then David stepped into the room, slow, deliberate. The air shifted with him. Sarah gripped the arm of the chair, willing herself not to shrink back. "Why are you really here?" she whispered. His eyes locked onto hers. "Because I can't stay away." Her breath caught. The words hung between them like lightning before it struck. "Don't," she said, her voice trembling. "Don't play with me. You've already taken so much." He stopped in front of her chair, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. His jaw was tight, his breathing uneven. "You think I'm playing?" His voice was low, dangerous, almost broken. "Do you have any idea what it does to me, seeing you here, in my house, carrying my children?" Her heart hammered. She wanted to push him away, to scream, to deny the pull she felt. But her body betrayed her, leaning ever so slightly forward, as though drawn to him against her will. "David," she whispered, warning and plea in one. He knelt suddenly, his hand braced on the arm of her chair, bringing his face level with hers. The closeness was suffocating. His eyes searched hers, raw, desperate, afraid. For the first time, he looked like a man stripped of armor. His hand moved, hesitated, then brushed the edge of her jaw. Her skin ignited beneath his touch. "Tell me to stop," he murmured. His breath fanned against her lips. "Tell me, and I will." But Sarah's lips parted, and no words came. The room spun, the air heavy with the scent of him, the ache of him. She hated him. She needed him. And she couldn't move. Their mouths hovered a breath apart, the line between ruin and salvation trembling. And then the door creaked. "David?" Mrs. Adams's voice called from the hall, distant but clear. He froze. The spell shattered. With a sharp exhale, he pulled back, standing abruptly, raking a hand through his hair. Sarah's chest heaved, her lips tingling from what hadn't happened. "Go to bed," he said roughly, his voice ragged with restraint. Without another glance, he strode from the library, his footsteps fading into the night. Sarah sat frozen, her body still aflame, her heart pounding. She touched her lips with trembling fingers, shaken to her core. Morning light spilled into the Adams estate like gold poured from heaven. Sarah sat in the back of the car, the smooth leather seats cool against her palms. Beside her, Mrs. Adams's elegance filled the space, pearls, perfume, and poise, but her voice, for once, carried warmth. "You'll be seeing Dr. Adeyemi today," she said, patting Sarah's hand gently. "She's the best obstetrician in Lagos. I've already had the hospital wing cleared for privacy. The world doesn't need to intrude on your joy just yet." Your joy. The word struck Sarah deeply. For weeks she had thought of her pregnancy as a burden in David's eyes, a transaction. Yet here, Mrs. Adams called it joy, and for the first time, Sarah allowed herself to imagine it could be. At the hospital, David was already waiting. He wore no tie today, his shirt sleeves rolled up, the picture of casual power. But there was tension in the set of his shoulders, a strange restlessness in his eyes. When his gaze found Sarah, something softened, fleeting but undeniable. "You came," he said simply. Mrs. Adams smiled knowingly. Of course she did. And so did you. Now behave yourselves, this is a happy day. The scan room was dim, the air cool. Sarah lay back, nerves tightening her chest as the doctor pressed gel to her belly. The screen flickered, and then there it was, the rapid flutter of 2 tiny heartbeats. Sarah gasped, tears spilling before she could stop them. David leaned closer, his hand braced on the edge of the bed. His face, usually so controlled, cracked open. All replaced arrogance. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at the screen as though seeing a miracle for the first time. Mrs. Adams dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Twins, she whispered, her voice trembling with reverence. Double blessing. Sarah turned her head, catching David's expression in the dim light. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at her. At the curve of her smile, the tears on her cheeks. And for once, there was no hardness in his eyes, only wonder. On the drive back, Mrs. Adams insisted they all sit together. She fussed over Sarah's appetite, planned out meals, even teased David lightly. Your children already make their presence known. They'll demand your attention every step of the way. Best you start practicing now. Sarah laughed softly, and to her surprise, David's lips curved too, not the sharp smirk of the boardroom, but something warmer, rarer. That evening, after dinner, Mrs. Adams disappeared upstairs, leaving Sarah and David alone in the garden. Lanterns lit the pathways, casting pools of light over the trimmed hedges. The night smelled of hibiscus and wet earth. Sarah traced her fingers along a stone bench, her heart still raw from the sound of her baby's heartbeats. David stood a few paces away, his hands shoved into his pockets. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't hostile this time. Finally, he spoke. When I saw them today. I don't know how to explain it. His voice was low, almost vulnerable. It felt like everything I've been chasing suddenly meant nothing. Sarah's breath caught. She wanted to reach for him, but fear kept her rooted. David, she began, unsure what she meant to say. He turned to her then, the lantern light catching the storm in his eyes. For a moment, they simply stared, 2 worlds colliding, 2 hearts breaking and rebuilding in the same beat. But instead of stepping closer, David dragged a hand down his face, shaking his head as though fighting himself. Go inside, Sarah. It's late. She obeyed, but as she walked past him, the air between them sparked, charged, trembling with everything unsaid. Upstairs, Mrs. Adams watched from her window, a knowing smile on her lips. She had seen enough love stories bloom in her lifetime to recognize the first dangerous stirrings of one. Good, she murmured to herself. Very good. The days after the hospital visit blurred into a rhythm Sarah hadn't expected. Breakfasts in the sunlit dining room, quiet car rides to appointments, evenings where Mrs. Adams insisted they all sit together and talk like a family. And always, David was there. At first, Sarah told herself it was duty. His mother demanded his presence, and he obeyed. But slowly, she saw something else, the way he leaned forward whenever she laughed, the way his gaze lingered when he thought she wasn't watching, the way his hand steadied her arm when she stood too quickly. One afternoon, Mrs. Adams pressed 2 pamphlets into their hands. Couple antenatal classes. Sarah almost protested, but David surprised her. We'll go, he said simply, and that was the end of it. The class was filled with couples, hands entwined, laughter echoing around the room. Sarah felt awkward, exposed, but then the instructor told them to practice breathing. David sat across from her, his eyes fixed on hers as they inhaled and exhaled together. It was ridiculous, she thought. Just breathing. Yet in that moment, the world disappeared, no contracts, no anger, no past wounds. Just his steady gaze anchoring her, grounding her. On the drive home, silence filled the car. Sarah looked out the window, her heart racing, and whispered so softly she wasn't sure he'd hear. You'll be a good father. The car slowed. David glanced at her, shock flickering across his face before giving way to something deeper, rawer. He didn't answer, but his hand found hers on the seat between them. Warm. Firm. Unshakable. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She wandered into the garden, needing air. And she found him there, sitting under the lanterns, staring at the stars. You should be resting, he murmured without turning. So should you, she replied. He looked at her then, and the armor was gone. For the first time, she saw him not as the ruthless billionaire, not as the man who had bound her to him with papers and promises, but as a man, weary, yearning, lost and found all at once. "I never wanted this," he said, voice rough. "Marriage. Children. I thought love was a weakness. But today, when you smiled at the scan. Sarah, I swear, something in me broke. I wanted it. I wanted you." Her breath hitched. Every instinct screamed to push him away, to remind herself of the anger, the resentment. Yet the truth pulsed louder in her chest, the truth she had buried. "I hate what you did to me," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "But I hate myself more for this, because despite everything, her voice cracked. "I love you, David." The words hung between them, fragile and trembling. David stood slowly, closing the space between them. He cupped her face with both hands, his touch gentle, reverent, as though she were something sacred. "I love you too," he said, voice breaking on the confession. "And I'll spend every day proving it, if you let me." When his lips touched hers, it wasn't the fire of hatred or the heat of force, it was the quiet, desperate kiss of two souls who had finally found home in each other. For the first time, Sarah didn't resist. She melted into him, her heart racing with the truth she could no longer deny. Above them, the lanterns flickered in the night breeze, witnesses to a love neither of them had planned but both could no longer live without. The room was hushed, the night outside pressing softly against the glass. Sarah stood by the edge of the bed, her hands twisting in the fabric of her wrapper, her breath unsteady. David closed the door behind them, and the faint click echoed like a vow. Neither spoke at first. He stood a few paces away, his eyes fixed on her, not with the cold hunger she had once feared, but with something that unnerved her more, reverence. "You should rest," he said finally, his voice low, roughened by restraint. Her heart pounded. She wanted to tell him to leave, to protect herself from the storm inside her chest. But instead, the words slipped out, trembling and true. "I don't want to be alone tonight." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then something inside him broke, and he crossed the space between them in 2 steps. His hand lifted to her cheek, calloused thumb brushing her skin as though she might vanish if he touched too firmly. "Sarah," he breathed, her name like a confession. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. His lips found hers, a tentative kiss at first, soft, tasting of hesitation. But when she answered, pressing closer, the kiss deepened, slow and searching, as though they were both learning a new language. Every brush of his mouth sent shivers through her. His hand slid to the curve of her neck, then lower, resting carefully at her waist. He paused, his breath uneven against her lips. "Tell me if this is too much." "You come first." "Always." Her body trembled, but not with fear. She took his hand and guided it to the swell of her belly, letting him feel the life inside her. "I trust you." The dam broke. His mouth trailed down her jaw, along the delicate line of her throat, each kiss a spark that set her skin aflame. Her fingers gripped his shirt, pulling him closer, kneading him in a way she had never allowed herself to admit. When he untied her wrapper, his hands moved slowly, reverently, as though unwrapping something sacred. Her breath caught, vulnerability tightening her chest, but his gaze never wavered. He looked at her not with possession, but with awe. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his voice breaking on the word. Heat flushed her cheeks. She had never felt more exposed, more seen. And yet, in his eyes, she was not ashamed. She was precious. Their bodies came together with aching slowness. Every movement was careful, guided by his patience and her trust. At first there was tension, sharp and unfamiliar, but his touch, his whispered reassurances, eased her. "Breathe with me," he coaxed softly, his lips brushing her temple. "Just breathe." She did. And when at last the tension gave way, a wave of warmth and closeness consumed her. She clung to him, her hands digging into his shoulders, overwhelmed by the strange mix of tenderness and fire coursing through her. "David," she gasped, his name breaking from her lips like a plea. "I'm here," he whispered back, his forehead pressed to hers. "Always." The world narrowed to the rhythm of their bodies, the heat of skin against skin, the dizzying flood of sensations she had never known. Time lost meaning, there was only the sound of her heartbeat, the weight of his arms, the wonder of two people unraveling and remaking themselves in each other's embrace. When it ended, he held her as though she were fragile glass, his hand spread protectively across her belly, his breath uneven against her hair. For a long while, silence wrapped around them, heavy with what they had shared. Sarah's head rested on his chest, listening to the steady thud of his heart. The intimacy, the safety, loosened something deep inside her, and words she had never planned to speak spilled out softly. "My mother," she whispered, her fingers tracing idle patterns against his skin. "She gave up everything for me." David's hand stilled, then resumed its slow strokes through her hair, inviting her to go on. "She worked herself sick, cooking, cleaning, selling fruits at the market. My father left before I was old enough to remember him, but Mama, she never left. Even when she was too weak to stand, she would smile, tell me not to worry. She wanted me to dream, even when she couldn't anymore." Sarah's voice cracked, but she pressed on. "I owe her everything." David pressed a kiss to her hair, his chest tightening with each word. For the first time, he saw not just the woman in his arms, but the lineage of sacrifice and strength behind her. "She raised a fighter," he murmured. "And I almost broke you." Sarah lifted her head, her eyes glistening. "But you didn't. You're here." He looked at her then, truly looked, and knew he would never be the same. "I love you," he said, the words steady, fierce, undeniable. "And I'll love her too. As if she were my own mother." Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks, but she smiled, a small, fragile curve of joy. She nestled against him, her heart lighter than it had been in years. And as the night drew on, they lay tangled together, their whispered confessions and quiet promises weaving the beginning of something neither of them had ever believed possible, a love that was real, binding, and unstoppable. Morning light poured through the tall windows, gilding the silken sheets. Sarah stirred first, blinking against the glow. She lay tangled in David's arms, her head on his chest, his steady heartbeat a rhythm she could drown in. For a fleeting, impossible moment, she let herself believe the world outside did not exist. Then a sharp knock sounded on the door. Sarah sat up, clutching the sheet against her chest. David only groaned, pulling her back down. "Go back to sleep," he muttered, his voice still husky from the night. But the door opened anyway, and in swept Mrs. Adams, immaculate as always, pearls at her throat, her expression unreadable. Her gaze swept over the scene, her son bare-chested, Sarah flustered and blushing, the unmistakable intimacy of a bed shared. For a long beat, silence reigned. Then, slowly, Mrs. Adams's lips curved. "Well," she said dryly, "it seems I won't have to wonder anymore if my son is capable of feeling." David sat up abruptly, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Mother." She raised a hand, silencing him, her eyes now twinkling with amusement. "Don't bristle, David. I'm relieved. At least now those children will be born into something resembling affection, instead of cold strategy." Sarah flushed crimson, torn between embarrassment and laughter. But Mrs. Adams's smile softened when her gaze settled on the girl. "And you," she said warmly, "look as though you've just walked into the lion's den and tamed the beast." Sarah ducked her head, unable to find words. Mrs. Adams only chuckled. "Good. Keep him human, child. He's been steel for too long." Then, turning brisk, she added, "Now, get dressed. Both of you. There's someone who deserves to see you together, and I mean your mother, Sarah. It's time we paid her a visit." The journey to the hospital was quiet, but not heavy. Sarah sat between them in the car, her fingers twined with David's beneath the leather seat, hidden but strong. Her mother's suite at St. Catherine's smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. She was propped up on pillows, her frail frame wrapped in soft blankets, but her eyes lit up the moment Sarah entered. "Mama," Sarah whispered, rushing to her side, kissing her cheeks. Her mother cupped her face with thin, trembling hands. "My child, you look different. Brighter. What has happened?" Sarah hesitated, but before she could speak, David stepped forward. His usual armor of indifference was gone. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight she had never heard before. "I came here to tell you that I love your daughter. I will protect her, honor her, and love the children she carries. Not because of duty. Because she is mine, and I am hers." Sarah's breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes. Her mother looked between them, her gaze sharp despite her frailty. For a long moment she said nothing, then she smiled, tired but radiant. "Then I can rest easy. My Sarah is safe." David reached down and took Sarah's hand openly, no longer hiding. She squeezed his fingers, her heart swelling. For the first time, love felt not like a forbidden flame, but a promise made before witnesses. From that day, everything shifted. Mrs. Adams, though occasionally sharp-tongued, teased them openly, her laughter echoing through the mansion. Sarah blushed often, David scowled in mock annoyance, but their bond grew stronger under his mother's watchful eye. Together, Sarah and David began attending antenatal visits. The doctor smiled at the sight of him holding her hand, listening intently to every instruction, as though each word might save her life. When the sonographer showed them the shapes of the babies, two tiny forms wriggling in the glow of the screen, David's hand tightened on Sarah's so fiercely she thought he might break. "They're ours," he whispered, awe thick in his voice. "Ours?" Sarah turned her head and saw it, the boyish wonder, the vulnerability he hid from the world. And in that moment, she knew she had not only fallen in love with him, she had given him back a piece of his soul. 8 months. Sarah's body had transformed, her belly high and round, her steps slower, her hands always resting protectively on the life inside her. Yet David never once looked at her with pity, only with awe, as though every curve, every change was a miracle he couldn't stop marveling at. One evening, the garden was strewn with soft lights, the scent of night-blooming jasmine thick in the air. Mrs. Adams had arranged a quiet dinner, but disappeared halfway through with a knowing smile, leaving them alone under the stars. David rose suddenly, nerves betraying themselves in the tension of his shoulders. He circled the table and dropped to one knee before Sarah's chair. Her breath caught. "Sarah Brown," he said, voice low, steady, but his eyes were storm-bright. "You came into my life as a contract, an obligation. But you became my truth. You made me human again. You gave me love, and soon, you'll give me our children. I don't deserve you, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled hot down Sarah's cheeks. She covered her mouth with her hands, shaking her head in disbelief, then nodding fiercely. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, David." He slid the ring onto her trembling finger, kissed her hands, her belly, her lips. And in the hush of the night, beneath the glow of the lights, he held her as though she was both fragile glass and unbreakable steel. That night, back in their room, the air was charged with more than love. David's hands lingered over her swollen belly, reverent, cautious. "Are you sure?" he murmured. Sarah nodded, her voice breathless. "I want you. I need you." He kissed her slowly, deeply, lowering her carefully onto the sheets. Every touch was tender, deliberate, worshipful. He kissed the swell of her breasts, the curve of her belly, whispering words of love against her skin. His hands supported her, adjusting pillows to ease her, his every movement careful not to press too hard. When at last they joined, it was with exquisite slowness, his restraint a battle against the fire in his veins. Sarah arched against him, moaning softly, every nerve alight. "David," she gasped, clutching at him. "I've got you," he whispered back, his forehead pressed to hers, sweat beading his brow. "You're safe. Always safe with me." Their bodies moved together in a rhythm both urgent and gentle, a dance of love and reverence. The tension built, wave after wave, until Sarah shattered beneath him with a cry, her body trembling. David followed, his groan muffled against her neck, his hands cradling her belly protectively even in release. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, breathless, Sarah's head resting against his chest. His hand stroked lazily over her hair, her back, her stomach. "You're my everything," he whispered, voice hoarse. "You and them. My whole world." She smiled through her tears, kissed his jaw, and drifted to sleep in the safety of his arms. The day came sooner than expected. It was dawn when Sarah woke to a sharp pain in her abdomen, her sheets damp. Panic flared, but David was at her side instantly, calm but urgent. "It's time," he said, his arm steady around her trembling frame. The mansion erupted in motion, Mrs. Adams barking orders, doctors rushing in, nurses preparing. David never left her side, his hand clasped firmly in hers as contractions racked her body. "You're strong," he whispered again and again, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "You can do this. I'm right here." Hours blurred together, pain, sweat, tears, until at last, the first cry split the air. A son, his tiny fists flailing, his voice fierce. Moments later, another cry joined the first, a daughter, delicate and strong all at once. Sarah sobbed, exhaustion and joy flooding her. David kissed her face, her hands, their babies, his tears falling freely for the first time in years. They're perfect, he whispered, cradling both newborns in trembling arms before laying them gently against Sarah's chest. Just like their mother. Sarah looked down at the tiny faces, her heart swelling until it hurt. David wrapped himself around all three of them, his family, his vow sealed not with words, but with presence. And in that moment, surrounded by love, Sarah Brown, once a girl who thought she had been bought and broken, became a woman who had built a new life, bound not by contracts or fear, but by a love fierce enough to change everything. The mansion, once echoing with silence and formality, now pulsed with new life. Every cry from the nursery was a summons, every coo a miracle. Sarah sat in the rocking chair, her hair loose, eyes heavy with exhaustion. One of the twins, the boy, suckled sleepily in her arms. The girl lay cradled in David's, his large hands dwarfing her tiny frame. "You're a greedy little thing, aren't you?" David murmured, his deep voice softened into something almost unrecognizable. He pressed his lips to the baby's forehead, inhaling her newborn scent as though it were air itself. Sarah smiled weakly, watching him. The sight of David Adams, billionaire, untouchable, ruthless, swaying awkwardly with a swaddled infant against his chest was a kind of poetry. "You're a natural," she whispered. He glanced up, smirking. "Don't sound so surprised." Her laughter broke into a yawn. He caught it immediately. "Give him here," David said, nodding toward their son. "You need sleep." "I can't," Sarah protested softly. "They'll need feeding again soon." "Sarah." His voice held no room for argument, but his eyes, they were tender. "Sleep. I'll wake you when it's time." She hesitated, then handed their son over. David balanced both babies, one in each arm, like he'd been born to it. Sarah's heart swelled until it hurt. She leaned back in the chair, drifting off to the side of him pacing the nursery, their children safe in his embrace. By the second week, help had doubled. Mrs. Johnson, Sarah's mother, stronger now, her health blossoming under proper care, had moved into the East Wing. She spent her mornings in the nursery, humming soft Yoruba lullabies that made Sarah's heart ache with gratitude. "They'll grow strong," Mama Brown said, smiling as she tucked a blanket around her granddaughter. "They have stubbornness in their father's jaw and fire in their mother's eyes. No one will bend them." Mrs. Adams appeared in the doorway, arms folded, pearls gleaming as always. "Or spoil them, if their grandmother keeps sneaking sweets in a few years." Mama Brown chuckled, unoffended. "And what is childhood without a little sweetness, eh?" Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, watching both women, so different, yet bound now by the lives of the twins. A warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. The evening of their third week home, David gathered everyone in the great hall. The chandeliers glittered, casting light across the polished marble. Sarah stood at his side, still in a soft gown, her ring catching the glow. David's hand tightened around hers. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice carrying in that effortless, commanding way. But tonight, there was no edge of steel, only pride. "Sarah and I are engaged. We will marry before the year ends." Gasps rippled from the staff who had gathered, whispers racing through the room. Sarah's cheeks burned, her eyes wide. She hadn't expected him to do this so soon, so publicly. David turned to her, his gaze softening in a way only she had ever seen. "I wanted them all to know. You are not my secret, Sarah. You're my future." Tears blurred her vision as applause rose around them. Mama Brown clapped, her laughter rich and joyous. Mrs. Adams smiled too, though with her usual restrained elegance. Later, she leaned close to Sarah and whispered, "Finally. Perhaps my son is not such a fool after all." Sarah laughed through her tears, clutching David's arm as he kissed her hand before the room, sealing their promise not just between them, but before everyone. For the first time, Sarah felt not like an outsider brought into luxury, but like a woman standing proudly in her own destiny, hand in hand with the man who had once been her tormentor, and was now her home. The Adams estate had become a hive of activity. Designers, florists, and event planners bustled through the halls with swatches of fabric and trays of canapes, chattering in hushed, deferential tones whenever David passed by. Sarah felt like she was walking through a dream she hadn't signed up for. One morning, she stood on a pedestal in the center of a private atelier room, swathed in ivory silk while three seamstresses pinned the hem of her gown. The mirror reflected a bride, glowing, elegant, transformed. But all Sarah could see was the girl from Ajij who had once scrubbed office floors to pay her mother's hospital bills. "Stop fidgeting," Mrs. Adams said lightly, sipping tea from a porcelain cup as though commanding an army came as easily as breathing. "You'll wrinkle the fabric." Sarah flushed. "Sorry." Mama Brown rose from the corner, walking slowly but firmly now that her health had returned. She brushed her hand down Sarah's arm, smiling. "You look beautiful, my child. Your father would have been proud to walk you down the aisle." Sarah's throat tightened. She nodded, blinking back sudden tears. Mrs. Adams, to her credit, didn't scoff. Instead, she set her teacup down and added, almost softly, "And he would have been proud of the man you chose." Sarah's gaze darted to the doorway, where David stood leaning against the frame, his tie loosened, watching her with an expression that made her knees weak. Pride. Possession. Love. He strode forward, ignoring the seamstresses fluttering about, and caught her hand. "You'll outshine the whole world, Sarah," he murmured, low enough that only she heard. "Let them whisper. Let them choke on their envy. You're mine, and that's all that matters." Her heart thudded against her ribs. She squeezed his hand, whispering back, "And I'm yours." But the whispers did come. In the evenings, Sarah overheard snatches from visiting relatives and old money acquaintances. "She's not one of us. A poor girl, a scandal wrapped in silk. David must have lost his mind." The first time she heard it, her cheeks burned with shame. She had retreated to the nursery, holding one of the twins close as though her children could shield her. David found her there. "Who was it?" he demanded, his voice thunder in the quiet room. "It doesn't matter," Sarah whispered. "They're right. I don't belong in your world." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. His jaw was tight, his eyes blazing. "My world belongs to me. And you, Sarah Brown, belong exactly where I put you, by my side. Always." Her resistance crumbled. She pressed her forehead against his chest, breathing in the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. He wrapped his arms around her, their child between them, sealing the vow with silence. That night, passion burned hotter than ever. David kissed her like he needed to prove something, to her, to himself, to the world. His hands roamed over her body, reverent but possessive, as though memorizing every curve before it changed again. "Say it," he growled against her throat. She gasped, clutching his shoulders. "Say what?" "That you're mine." His teeth grazed her skin, a shiver shooting down her spine. "I'm yours," she whispered, then louder, breathless, "I'm yours, David." The words unraveled him. He worshipped her body, careful yet relentless, their lovemaking a fusion of fire and tenderness. Even in the quiet after, when they lay tangled in silk sheets, his hand rested firmly on hers, their fingers intertwined over her heart. As the weeks passed, invitations were sent. The engagement was splashed across society pages, David Adams to wed mystery bride, mother of his twins. Speculation raged, but Sarah no longer trembled under its weight. She had David, their children, and the steady strength of two mothers behind her. And one evening, as she tucked the twins into their cradles, she whispered, "Soon, we'll be a family in every way." David, standing in the doorway, heard her. His heart clenched with a fierce, protective love, and he silently vowed that nothing, not whispers, not legacy, not fate, would ever tear them apart again. The morning of the wedding dawned golden. Sunlight spilled across Lagos, gilding the city in warmth, and the Adams estate glimmered like a palace. Tents draped in ivory and gold covered the sprawling gardens, fountains bubbled, and fresh orchids perfumed the air. Guests poured in, business magnates, dignitaries, foreign investors, and Lagos high society, their jewels flashing beneath the sun. Inside the mansion, Sarah sat before a mirror framed in roses. Her gown flowed like liquid silk, a perfect fusion of Western elegance and Yoruba tradition. Tiny beads glittered across the bodice, catching light with every breath. A geli, delicate and understated, crowned her head, Mama Brown's handiwork woven into the folds. Her hands trembled as she held the bouquet. "Mama, I can't," her voice cracked. "I'm not ready for all of this. Look at them. They'll judge me." Mama Brown, radiant in osso oak, cupped her daughter's cheeks. "Let them judge. Do they breathe for you? Do they love you? Do they know what you carried to stand here today? No, Sarah. Only you and your husband do. And today, you walk out there not as their servant, but as their queen." Mrs. Adams entered just then, draped in emerald silk, pearls glistening. She studied Sarah, her sharp eyes softening. For once, your mother and I agree. You look every inch the bride my son needs. Hold your head high, child. They'll see strength before scandal. Tears shimmered in Sarah's eyes as she nodded, clutching both women's hands. Outside, music swelled, battered drums and violins entwined in rhythm. David waited at the altar, tall and commanding in a white agbada embroidered with gold, his gaze locked on the aisle. When Sarah appeared, the crowd collectively drew breath. She moved slowly, every step deliberate, her veil trailing like mist behind her. Gasps rippled, but this time not of scandal, but awe. She was luminous, her fear eclipsed by quiet pride. David's heart hammered. He barely noticed the guests, the cameras, the opulence. All he saw was her, the woman who had stormed his fortress, torn down his walls, and claimed his heart. When she reached him, his hand reached out instinctively. She placed hers in his, trembling but sure. The priest spoke words neither would remember later, because all that mattered were the vows. David's voice was low but fierce, cutting through the hush. I was a man of stone. You gave me life. You gave me love. You gave me children. Today I give you everything, my name, my empire, my soul. I will never let you stand alone again. Sarah's tears spilled, her voice shaking yet strong. You tried to buy me, and I hated you for it. But in the end, you gave me what no one else could, a love that is real, and a family that is mine. I promise to stand with you, to fight with you, to love you, always. The priest blessed their union. You may kiss your bride. David didn't hesitate. He swept her into his arms and kissed her deeply, unashamed, as applause thundered around them. The reception was a riot of color and joy. Traditional dancers whirled, drummers pounded rhythms into the night, and champagne flowed like water. Guests who had once whispered their disdain now applauded, bowing before the undeniable bond blazing between the couple. At the high table, Mrs. Adams raised her glass. To my son, who finally learned that strength lies not in control, but in love. And to Sarah, who taught him. Mama Brown laughed, her eyes shining. May their love be louder than any drum, stronger than any storm. Sarah leaned against David, exhaustion and joy mingling in her chest. He pressed a kiss to her temple, his hand resting possessively on hers. You're mine now, Mrs. Adams. Forever. Forever, she echoed, smiling against his lips. The reception lingered into the early hours, but for Sarah and David, the night truly began when the last guest departed. The mansion quieted, lanterns burning low, the laughter fading into echoes. He lifted her in his arms as though she weighed nothing, carrying her through gilded halls, her gown spilling like moonlight over his shoulder. Sarah's laughter trembled against his neck. You don't have to carry me. I can walk. David's jaw brushed her temple as he murmured, Tonight, you walk nowhere. Tonight, you are mine, in every way I have waited for. The door closed behind them with a heavy click. He set her down on the bed gently, his hands trailing down her arms, but the heat in his eyes made her shiver. For so long, his touches had been careful, restrained, but tonight, his restraint snapped like thread. He pulled the pins from her veil, letting it tumble to the floor. His fingers found the hidden fastenings of her gown, each undone slowly, reverently, until the silk slid from her shoulders and pooled around her feet. God, David whispered, as though revering her. His thumb traced the line of her collarbone, his lips following. You're not just beautiful. You're the answer to a question I never knew I was asking. Sarah gasped when his mouth found hers, no cautious brush this time, but a kiss deep and consuming. His tongue demanded, coaxed, tasted her until she melted against him, moaning softly into his mouth. Every kiss was fire, each one hungrier than the last, as if he had starved his whole life and now feasted only on her. When she tugged at his agbada, he stripped it away with sudden urgency, leaving him bare-chested before her. His muscles rippled beneath her hands, hot and solid, and she traced him as though memorizing the man who was now hers. David, her voice trembled, equal parts plea and awe. He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath ragged. Tell me if it's too much. I'll stop if you. She silenced him with a kiss, fierce and certain. Don't stop. I want all of you. Something inside him broke. He laid her down carefully, his hands and mouth exploring her with growing hunger. He kissed the hollow of her throat, the swell of her breasts, the trembling plain of her stomach, reverent of the life it had already given, yet worshipping the woman who bore it. Her body arched as his hands roamed lower, each touch sending shivers coursing through her. When he finally entered her, it was slow, deliberate, his breath hot against her ear as she gasped, clutching him tightly. Sarah, his voice cracked, not with dominance, but with raw need. The first thrust made her cry out, her nails digging into his back. Pleasure bloomed, sharp and dizzying, mingling with tears. She had never known such intimacy, such surrender. His movements began steady, careful, but the heat between them built like a storm, driving him faster, deeper, until every thrust echoed with love and desperation. Their moans filled the room, rising and breaking, her body answering his imperfect rhythm. She whispered his name like a prayer, and with every sound, he came undone more, his control unraveling. "I've never needed anyone," David groaned against her lips, his thrusts rougher now, his body trembling. "But you, Sarah, you undo me. You own me." Her tears spilled, but they were tears of release, of joy, of recognition that what they shared was no longer shadowed, no longer forbidden. She kissed him back wildly, whispering, "I love you. I love you." The words broke him. He thrust harder, lost in her, his forehead pressed to hers as his climax tore through him, dragging hers with it. They cried out together, bodies shuddering, clutching each other as though they might disappear if they let go. When the storm passed, he collapsed against her, still inside her, his breath harsh and uneven. He didn't move, didn't want to. His arms locked around her like chains. Sarah stroked his hair, her own body trembling. "You unraveled," she whispered with a shaky laugh. David lifted his head, sweat-damp curls falling across his brow. His eyes were softer than she had ever seen. "For you, Sarah, I'll unravel every night." He kissed her again, slow this time, tender, sealing the promise. And there, tangled in silk and devotion, husband and wife drifted into their forever, their bodies still joined, their hearts finally unguarded. The days after the wedding were a blur of tenderness. Their first nights as husband and wife were filled not with doubt but with laughter, whispered promises, and the quiet wonder of waking up beside each other. Sarah would stir in the dawn light, David's arm wrapped securely around her waist, as though even in sleep he refused to let her go. Months later, the twins filled their world with chaos and joy. Midnight feedings, tiny socks scattered across the mansion, little fists curling around David's finger, these became the milestones that mattered more to him than any boardroom victory. Sarah bloomed in motherhood, her laughter ringing through the halls, turning a cold empire into a home. Mama Brown, once frail, now walked the gardens with strength, teaching her grandchildren the old songs of resilience. Mrs. Adams, regal as ever, found herself softened by the role of grandmother, her sharp gaze often misting with pride as she watched the family she once feared would never exist. And the years passed. Their love did not fade, it deepened. David, once a man of ice, became a man undone by the touch of his wife's hand, by the smile she saved only for him. Sarah, once bound by fear, now stood radiant and strong, knowing she was more than his wife, she was his partner, his equal, his heart. They built not just a family but a legacy. Love had grown where power once ruled. On quiet nights, when the children were asleep and the house was still, David would hold Sarah close and whisper into her hair, "You were never the mistake. You were always the answer." And Sarah, her lips brushing his jaw, would smile and reply, "And you were always the man I didn't want to love, until I couldn't imagine my life without you." Their story began in chaos. It blossomed in struggle. And it endured, in love, in family, in forever. If you believe in love that can rise from the ashes, if you believe in second chances and the kind of passion that never fades, then this story is for you. Don't forget to like, comment, and share if Sarah and David's journey touched your heart. And subscribe to African Love Chronicles for more stories of passion, resilience, and happily ever afters. Because here, love always finds a way.